My name is Father Marcos, and I never thought I'd be sharing this story. To be honest, I'm still not sure if I even want to. But after what I experienced during my death, yes, my death, I realize I have no choice. Someone needs to hear this. Maybe it's you. I don't know. All I know is that it's too important to keep to myself. It started on a night like any other, or so I thought. The rain had been coming down in sheets all day, and by the time I left the church, it had turned the roads into rivers of slick asphalt. I'd stayed late after Vespers, finishing up some paperwork and tidying the sanctuary. The flickering candlelight in the dim nave always gave me peace, and I lingered there longer than I should have, staring at the icons and murmuring a final prayer for my flock before heading home. My thoughts were consumed by the ordinary: what to make for dinner, whether my old car would survive another winter, and the upcoming baptism scheduled for Sunday. Nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing that would hint that my world was about to change forever. The drive home should have been uneventful. I took the same winding country road I'd driven hundreds of times before, a narrow strip flanked by towering pines that swayed ominously in the wind. The rain pounded against the windshield, and the wipers struggled to keep up. My hands gripped the wheel tightly, knuckles white as I squinted through the haze of water and fog. It felt as though the darkness had swallowed the world whole and I was driving through the void. The deer came out of nowhere. One moment the road was clear. The next it was there, frozen in the headlights, its eyes wide and glassy with panic. I jerked the wheel instinctively, and the tires skidded on the wet pavement. Time seemed to slow as the car spun, the headlights sweeping across the trees in dizzying arcs. I remember the sound most vividly, the screech of tires, the crunch of metal, and then the deafening silence that followed. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a silence so profound it felt alive, pressing against my chest and ears like a physical force. Then everything went black. I don't know how long it lasted. Seconds, minutes. It felt like an eternity and an instant all at once. When I came to, I wasn't in my car anymore. In fact, I wasn't anywhere, or at least not anywhere I could recognize. It's hard to describe what it felt like because it wasn't like anything I'd ever known. There was no pain, no fear, no cold or wet, just an overwhelming sense of stillness and peace. I was weightless, as though the very concept of gravity no longer applied to me. At first, I thought I was dreaming, or perhaps this was the disorienting haze of unconsciousness after a crash. But then I saw the light. It wasn't a light in the way we think of light, not something that could be compared to the sun or a lamp. It was everywhere and nowhere, all-encompassing yet impossibly gentle. It didn't shine, it embraced. It wrapped around me, through me, filling every part of my being with a warmth that defies words. And in that moment, I felt something I'd never felt before: absolute, unconditional love. It wasn't just an emotion, it was a presence as real as the ground beneath my feet, except there was no ground either. I was floating, or perhaps flying, being drawn toward the source of that light by a force I couldn't resist and didn't want to. As I moved closer, I began to hear something faint in the distance, a sound that wasn't a sound. It was like music, but not made with any instrument. It was harmony itself, a resonance that vibrated through every fiber of my soul. And then, suddenly, I wasn't alone. There was someone or something standing before me, though standing isn't quite the right word. He, or it, radiated the same light that filled the space around us, only more intensely. I couldn't look directly at him, but I didn't need to. I knew who it was even before he spoke. The moment I heard his voice, my soul trembled with recognition. It wasn't like hearing with my ears. It was deeper, as though the words were imprinted directly onto my being. "You are loved," he said, and the weight of those 3 words nearly broke me. I had spent my life preaching about the love of Christ, reading scripture and praying, but nothing could have prepared me for the overwhelming reality of his presence. This was no metaphor, no theological concept. This was love itself, standing before me, and I was undone. I fell, or maybe I floated, to my knees, though I couldn't feel a ground beneath me. Tears streamed down my face, though I wasn't sure I had a body in the way I understood it. "Lord," I managed to whisper, my voice trembling with awe and terror. "I don't understand. Why am I here?" "You are here because it is not yet your time," he replied, his voice filled with a mixture of sorrow and hope. "But there is something you must see, something you must know before you return." I didn't dare question him. Every part of me wanted to stay in that place, to remain in his presence forever. But as soon as he spoke, the light around us began to shift. It was as though a curtain had been pulled back, revealing a scene that stretched out before me like a vast, living tapestry. I saw the world, not as it appears to us, but as it truly is. The veil that separates the physical from the spiritual was lifted, and I could see the forces at work behind the scenes. At first, it was beautiful. I saw acts of kindness and love, people helping one another, praying and creating beauty in the midst of their struggles. These moments shone like stars against the backdrop of the world, small but brilliant. But then the vision began to change. Shadows crept in at the edges, dark tendrils that twisted and writhed, seeking to snuff out the light. These weren't just metaphors, they were alive, malevolent, and cunning. I could feel their hatred, their hunger for destruction. "What is this?" I asked, my voice shaking. "This is the battle," he said, his tone heavy with sorrow. "It has always been, but now it grows. The darkness is spreading, feeding on fear, division, and deception. And soon it will unveil its greatest weapon." As he spoke, the vision shifted again. I saw a world that looked like ours but wasn't. People walked through cities filled with dazzling technology, their faces lit by glowing screens. They were connected yet isolated, surrounded by voices yet utterly alone. And then I saw it, a figure cloaked in light, so dazzling and beautiful that it took my breath away. At first, I thought it was him, the one who stood beside me. But as I looked closer, I felt a chill run through me. There was something wrong about this figure, something that felt hollow. "Who is that?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "The deceiver," he said, his voice tinged with grief. "He will come and many will follow, believing he brings salvation. But his light is not mine. It is a counterfeit, a trap for those who do not discern the truth." The scene before me grew darker, more chaotic. I saw people turning on one another, families divided, and churches crumbling under the weight of corruption and complacency. But even in the midst of the darkness, I saw glimmers of hope, small groups of believers, clinging to their faith and to one another. Their light was faint but steady, refusing to be extinguished. "You must warn them," he said, turning to me. "The time is short and the deception will be great. Even the faithful will be tested." I felt a weight settle on me, a burden too heavy to bear. "Why me?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. "I'm no one. I'm just a priest in a small town. Who will listen to me?" He placed a hand on my shoulder, and the warmth of his touch filled me with strength I didn't know I had. "You are not alone," he said. "I am with you always. Speak the truth, even when it is hard, even when you are not believed. It is not your job to convince, only to be faithful." Before I could respond, the vision began to fade. The light dimmed, the music softened, and I felt myself being pulled away. I cried out, begging to stay, but his voice echoed in my soul one last time. "Remember what you have seen. Be strong, for I am with you." Then everything went dark and I was falling. I woke to the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor and the distant murmur of voices. The light above me was harsh and fluorescent, a stark contrast to the warmth I had just left behind. My body felt heavy, as though I'd been dragged back from someplace far away. Pain began to creep in, dull at first, then sharp and insistent, radiating from every part of me. I blinked, trying to make sense of where I was, when a face appeared above me. It was my wife, Sophia, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Marcos," she said, her voice trembling. "Oh, thank God, you're awake." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she took my hand, gripping it tightly. I wanted to speak, to tell her everything was going to be all right, but my throat was dry and my mind was reeling. Memories of the crash flooded back, slick roads, the deer, the spinning car, but they felt distant, as though they belonged to someone else. What lingered most vividly was the light, the voice, and the vision I had been shown. Doctors and nurses shuffled in, their movements quick and efficient. They spoke in clipped tones, asking questions and checking my vitals, but I barely heard them. My thoughts were consumed by what I had experienced, by the weight of the message I had been given. When the room finally cleared, leaving just Sophia and me, I tried to speak. My voice came out hoarse and cracked. How long? I managed to rasp. 2 days, she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You've been unconscious since the accident. They weren't sure if... Her voice broke and she covered her mouth, struggling to hold back a sob. I squeezed her hand weakly, trying to reassure her, though I wasn't sure how much of it was for her and how much for myself. 2 days. It felt impossible, like I'd been gone for much longer and only moments at the same time. There's something I need to tell you, I said, my voice stronger now but still shaky. She looked at me, her expression a mixture of relief and concern. What is it? I hesitated, unsure where to begin. How could I possibly explain what I had seen, what I had felt? Would she even believe me? The memory of Christ's words echoed in my mind, "Speak the truth, even when it is hard." I saw him, I said finally, my voice trembling with emotion. I saw Christ. Her eyes widened and for a moment she said nothing. I couldn't tell if she was shocked, skeptical, or simply trying to process my words. I died, Sophia, at least I think I did, but it wasn't the end. I was somewhere else. With him, and he showed me things I can't ignore. She frowned, her brow furrowing in concern. Marcos, you've been through a lot. The doctors said the trauma... No, I interrupted, shaking my head despite the pain it caused. This wasn't a hallucination or a dream. It was real, more real than this. I gestured weakly to the hospital room around us. I told her everything, from the moment I saw the light to the vision of the world and the warning I had been given. As I spoke, her expression shifted from confusion to something else, fear perhaps, or maybe awe. The deceiver is coming, I said, my voice cracking under the weight of the words. He will look like salvation, like hope, but he's a lie, and people will follow him, even the faithful. Sophia stared at me, her hands trembling as they rested on the edge of the bed. Marcos, this is a lot to take in. I know, I said, my voice softening. I don't expect you to understand. I'm not even sure I understand, but I can't ignore it. I can't pretend it didn't happen. She nodded slowly, her gaze distant as though she were trying to piece it all together. What are you going to do? She asked after a long silence. I don't know, I admitted. But I have to warn people, I have to tell them the truth. Her eyes met mine and I could see the fear there, the worry for what this might mean for us, for our family. But beneath it I saw something else, faith. She didn't fully understand, but she believed in me. I'll help you, she said quietly, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. Whatever you need, I'll help you. Relief washed over me, and for the first time since waking, I felt a glimmer of hope. I didn't know what lay ahead or how I would carry out the task I had been given, but I knew I wouldn't be facing it alone. The days that followed were a blur of recovery and reflection. My body healed slowly, but my mind felt restless, consumed by the weight of what I had seen. Sophia stayed by my side, her presence a quiet comfort, though I could see the strain my story had placed on her. She believed me, or at least she believed that I believed. But I could sense her unease, the unspoken fear that I had been somehow altered by the crash, that the man who had come back to her wasn't entirely the same as the one she had kissed goodbye that rainy evening. The doctors called it a miracle. My injuries were severe, they said, a fractured rib, a concussion, internal bruising, but not fatal. By all accounts, I shouldn't have walked away from that wreckage alive. You're lucky, one of them said, shaking his head in disbelief as he reviewed my chart. But I didn't feel lucky. I felt chosen. And with that came a responsibility I wasn't sure I was ready to bear. It was a cold, clear morning when I returned to the church for the first time since the accident. The air was sharp with the scent of pine, and frost clung to the ground in delicate patterns. I stood outside the heavy wooden doors, staring up at the stone facade with a mix of dread and determination. This place had always been a sanctuary for me, a refuge from the chaos of the world. But now it felt different. It felt like the starting point of a journey I wasn't sure I wanted to take. The church was empty when I entered, the only sound the faint creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. The familiar scent of beeswax candles and incense filled the air, and the icons seemed to watch me with silent understanding. I walked slowly down the aisle, my footsteps echoing in the stillness, until I reached the altar. Kneeling before it, I bowed my head and let out a shuddering breath. "Lord," I whispered, my voice breaking, "I don't know how to do this. I don't know if I'm strong enough." The silence that followed was heavy but not empty. It was as though the walls themselves were listening, holding my doubts and fears with a quiet, unyielding patience. And then, in the stillness, I felt it again, the presence. It wasn't as overwhelming as it had been in the light, but it was unmistakable. A warmth that spread through me, steady and reassuring. "You are not alone." The words were not spoken, yet they resonated within me as clear as if they had been. I felt a tear slip down my cheek and didn't bother to wipe it away. Rising slowly, I turned and faced the empty pews, imagining the faces of my congregation. They were good people, kind and faithful, but I knew this message would challenge them. It challenged me. How could I ask them to believe what I had seen when I could barely comprehend it myself? That Sunday, the church was fuller than usual. Word of my accident had spread through the small town, and curiosity had drawn even those who rarely attended. As I stood at the pulpit, looking out over the sea of familiar faces, my heart pounded in my chest. I had prepared a sermon, one filled with the comforting platitudes they were used to hearing, but the words felt hollow now. I couldn't preach what I had always preached, not after what I had experienced. Taking a deep breath, I set my notes aside and stepped out from behind the pulpit. "My friends," I began, my voice steady but quiet, "today I'm not here to give you a sermon. I'm here to tell you the truth. Something happened to me during the accident, something I cannot explain away or ignore. I died, or at least I believe I did, and what I saw during that time has changed me forever." A murmur rippled through the congregation, faces shifting from curiosity to concern. I pressed on, recounting my experience with the light, the voice, and the vision of the world. I spoke of the coming deception, of the figure cloaked in false light, and of the need for vigilance and faith. The words poured out of me, unfiltered and raw, and by the time I finished, the room was silent. "I know this is hard to believe," I said, my voice breaking with emotion. "And I don't blame you if you doubt me, but I cannot keep this to myself. I was shown these things for a reason, and I believe that reason is to warn you, to prepare you, to remind you that our faith is not just a comfort, it is a shield, and we must use it." For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence stretched on, heavy and oppressive, until finally an older woman in the front pew stood. Her name was Maria, a widow who had been a member of the church for decades. Her voice was firm but kind as she said, "Father Marcos, we believe you, or at least we believe in you. Tell us what we need to do." Her words broke the dam, and soon others were standing, nodding, murmuring their agreement. The relief that washed over me was almost overwhelming, but it was tempered by the weight of what lay ahead. This was only the beginning. The weeks that followed were unlike anything I had ever experienced. My days, once filled with the predictable rhythms of pastoral life, were now consumed by an overwhelming sense of urgency. I pored over scripture, searching for passages that might align with the vision I had been shown, hoping for clarity or confirmation. The more I read, the more I saw the warnings I had once skimmed over with abstract detachment. False prophets, the great deceiver, the trials of the faithful. It was all there, hidden in plain sight, waiting to be understood. My congregation had shifted too. Some people never returned after that first sermon, their discomfort with my testimony driving them away. Others came in droves, drawn by whispers of what had happened. They sat in the pews, their faces a mixture of hope and fear, waiting for answers I wasn't sure I could give. The weight of their trust was crushing at times, but it also kept me going. I couldn't fail them, not after what I had seen. One evening, after a particularly long day of counseling and preparation, I sat in the rectory with Sophia. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the room. She brought me a cup of tea and sat beside me, her presence as steadying as ever. "You're wearing yourself thin," she said gently, placing a hand on my arm. "You can't carry all of this on your own." "I don't have a choice," I replied, my voice heavy with exhaustion. "They're looking to me for guidance. If I don't warn them, who will?" She hesitated, her gaze searching mine. "Marcos, you've done so much already, but you're still human. You need rest. You need support." I sighed, leaning back in my chair. "I know you're right. But every time I close my eyes, I see it again. The darkness creeping in, the deceiver standing in the light. It's like it's burned into my soul." Sophia nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Then let me help you. We'll face it together." Her words, simple as they were, eased some of the burden I carried. I reached for her hand, grateful beyond words for her unwavering faith in me, even when I struggled to maintain my own. It was around this time that the dreams began. They weren't like ordinary dreams, fragmented and surreal. These were vivid, almost tangible, and always the same. I would find myself standing in a vast, empty landscape, the sky above me split between light and shadow. In the distance, the figure of the deceiver would appear, cloaked in dazzling light. He never spoke, but his presence radiated a chilling sense of power and deceit. And always at the edge of my vision, I could see the darkness closing in, spreading like ink through water. I shared these dreams with Sophia, and though she listened without judgment, I could see the worry etched into her face. "Maybe it's a sign," she said one night. "A reminder of what you're up against, or a warning," I murmured, staring into the fire, "that I'm not ready." The turning point came during a community meeting I had organized. The church hall was packed, the air buzzing with tension and anticipation. People from all walks of life had gathered, farmers, shopkeepers, teachers, each of them searching for answers, for hope. I stood before them, my hands clasped tightly, and began to speak. "You've all heard my story," I said, my voice steady despite the weight of their gazes. "And I know many of you are afraid. I won't lie to you. What's coming will not be easy, but we are not powerless. We have our faith and we have each other. Together we can stand against the darkness." As I spoke, I saw nods of agreement ripple through the crowd. But then a man in the back stood, his expression skeptical. "And what if you're wrong, Father?" he asked, his voice loud and challenging. "What if this is just some delusion brought on by your accident? What if all of this is for nothing?" The room fell silent, all eyes turning to me. I took a deep breath, meeting his gaze. "I can't prove to you that what I saw was real," I said honestly. "I can only tell you what I experienced and what I believe. But even if you doubt me, consider this. What harm is there in being prepared? In strengthening our faith, in coming together as a community? If I'm wrong, we lose nothing. But if I'm right..." I let the words hang in the air, the unspoken implications clear. The man sat down, his expression thoughtful, and the tension in the room eased. By the end of the night, people were volunteering to organize prayer groups, community watch teams, and even food storage plans. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope, not just for myself, but for all of us. As the hall emptied and the last of the candles were extinguished, Sophia came up beside me, slipping her hand into mine. "You're making a difference," she said softly. "I can see it." I nodded, though the weight of the vision still pressed heavily on me. "I just hope it's enough." Months passed, and life in the town settled into a strange rhythm. The initial shock of my story had faded, replaced by a quiet resolve among those who chose to stay. The congregation had dwindled slightly, but those who remained were unwavering in their commitment. Prayer groups filled the church nearly every evening, and the sense of community grew stronger with each passing day. It was as if people were bracing for something they couldn't yet see, driven by an unspoken awareness that the storm I had warned about was drawing closer. Despite the outward progress, I couldn't shake the sense of unease that clung to me like a shadow. The dreams continued, relentless in their clarity. Each time, the landscape seemed darker, the figure of the deceiver more imposing. I began to notice new details. A flicker of fear in the faces of those around him, a faint whisper of anguish carried on the wind. The light that surrounded him, so dazzling and pure, now seemed almost too perfect, its brilliance masking the corruption beneath. One night, after waking from another of these dreams, I found myself unable to go back to sleep. The house was silent, the only sound the faint creak of the old wooden floors as I paced. My thoughts were a tangled web of doubt and determination. What if I wasn't doing enough? What if I had misunderstood the vision, or worse, failed to act on it in the right way? I found myself drawn to the church, slipping out into the cold night air and walking the short distance to the stone building. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a pale, eerie light over the empty streets. As I pushed open the heavy doors, the familiar scent of incense greeted me, grounding me in its comforting familiarity. Kneeling before the altar, I bowed my head and whispered a prayer. "Lord, I don't know what else to do. Show me the way, please." The silence that followed was profound, stretching out until it felt almost oppressive. And then, as if in response, a faint warmth spread through the room. I opened my eyes and gasped, my heart pounding in my chest. The faint glow of candlelight now seemed brighter, as though a hidden presence was amplifying its light. I felt the now familiar presence wash over me, filling the space with a sense of peace and power. "You are on the path, but the path will not be easy." The voice resonated within me, clear and steady. It was the same voice I had heard in the light, and its words filled me with both reassurance and trepidation. "What more must I do?" I asked aloud, my voice trembling. "How do I prepare them for what's coming?" There was no immediate answer, but as the warmth receded, I felt a new sense of clarity. The vision wasn't just a warning, it was a call to action. I needed to do more than guide my congregation. I needed to expand the reach of the message, to ensure that as many people as possible were prepared. The next morning, I began writing. At first, the words came slowly, hesitant and unsure. But as the days turned into weeks, the message poured out of me with an urgency I couldn't ignore. I wrote about the vision, about the deceiver, and about the importance of faith in the face of darkness. I included scripture, personal reflections, and practical advice for staying vigilant. Sophia helped me edit and organize the pages, her steady presence a constant source of support. When the manuscript was finished, I sent it to a small publisher in the nearby city. To my surprise, they were eager to take it on, sensing the growing hunger for spiritual guidance in uncertain times. Within months, the book was printed, its simple cover bearing the title, "The Light and the Deception," a warning for the faithful. The response was overwhelming. Letters began pouring in from across the country, from people who had read the book and felt a stirring in their souls. Some wrote to share their own experiences, describing dreams and visions that mirrored my own. Others expressed gratitude for the message, saying it had reignited their faith or given them a sense of purpose in a chaotic world. The small town that had once felt so isolated was now a hub of connection, its church at the center of a growing movement. But with the attention came challenges. Skeptics criticized the book, accusing me of fear-mongering or exploiting people's faith for personal gain. Journalists showed up unannounced, their probing questions often laced with skepticism. I did my best to answer them honestly, but their doubt was a constant reminder of the uphill battle I faced. One evening, after a particularly difficult interview, Sophia found me sitting alone in the rectory, my head in my hands. "You can't let them get to you," she said softly, sitting beside me. "You're doing what you were called to do, that's all that matters." I nodded, though the weight of it all felt heavier than ever. "What if they're right?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What if this is all for nothing?" She took my hand in hers, her grip firm. "It's not for nothing," she said. "I see the way people look at you, the hope in their eyes. You've already made a difference, don't lose sight of that." Her words stayed with me long after she had gone to bed. As I sat in the quiet stillness of the night, I realized that the journey wasn't just about warning others. It was about holding on to faith in the face of doubt, about trusting in the path even when it seemed impossibly hard. And so, I resolved to keep going, no matter the cost. As the movement grew, so did the challenges. The quiet life I had once known was now a distant memory, replaced by a whirlwind of speaking engagements, interviews, and letters that arrived in stacks every day. Some people reached out with stories of their own, dreams, visions, and strange encounters that mirrored my experience in haunting ways. Others wrote with desperate pleas for guidance, seeking answers to questions I wasn't sure I could answer. Every day felt like a race against time, a relentless push to spread the message before it was too late. Despite the momentum, there were moments when I felt deeply alone. The vision had set me apart, not just from strangers but from people I had known my entire life. Some of my closest friends, men and women who had once served alongside me in the church, now looked at me with thinly veiled skepticism. Others distanced themselves entirely, unwilling to associate with what they saw as a dangerous fanaticism. Even within my own town, whispers followed me wherever I went. Still, I pressed on. The sense of urgency I felt was unshakable, like a fire burning in my chest. The dreams persisted, their intensity growing with each passing night. In one particularly vivid dream, I stood on the edge of a vast chasm, the ground crumbling beneath my feet. On the other side, I saw countless people, men, women, children, all staring at me with outstretched hands. Between us, the deceiver stood, his radiant light casting long, deceptive shadows. His eyes met mine, and in that moment I felt the full weight of what I was up against. When I woke, drenched in sweat, Sophia was already awake beside me. She reached out, brushing damp strands of hair from my forehead. "Another dream?" she asked softly. I nodded, swallowing hard. "They're getting worse." She held my hand tightly. "Maybe that means you're getting closer to what you're supposed to do." I wanted to believe her, but doubt lingered in the corners of my mind. How could I be sure I was on the right path? The vision had been clear, but its implications were vast and overwhelming. Every decision I made felt like a gamble, a desperate attempt to interpret the divine in a world so often ruled by chaos. One day, while walking through the town, I was stopped by a man I didn't recognize. He was tall and lean, with sharp features and piercing eyes that seemed to look straight through me. "Father Marcos," he said, his voice low and even. "I've been following your story." I nodded, wary but polite. "And what do you think of it?" He smiled faintly, the expression unsettling. "I think you've stumbled onto something far greater than you realize. But be careful, truth is a dangerous thing. It has a way of making enemies." Before I could respond, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. The encounter left me shaken, his words echoing in my mind long after he was gone. Who was he? And what did he mean by enemies? That evening I shared the encounter with Sophia. Her brow furrowed as she listened, her concern mirroring my own. "Do you think he was threatening you?" she asked. "I don't know," I admitted, but it felt ominous. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Strange cars appeared on our quiet street, lingering just long enough to arouse suspicion before driving off. People I didn't recognize began showing up at church events, their questions probing and pointed. And then there were the letters. Anonymous notes slipped under the church door, warning me to stop spreading my message. "You need to be careful," Sophia said one evening as we sorted through the day's mail. "Whoever these people are, they're taking this seriously." "So am I," I replied, the resolve in my voice masking the unease I felt. "If anything, this just proves I'm on the right path." They wouldn't try to stop me if they weren't afraid of the truth. But the pressure was beginning to take its toll. I found myself growing paranoid, second-guessing even the smallest decisions. The weight of responsibility, combined with the constant sense of being watched, left me exhausted and on edge. I turned to prayer more often than ever, seeking solace in the one place where I still felt a sense of peace. It was during one of these moments, kneeling before the altar in the empty church, that I felt the presence again. The warmth enveloped me, and the voice I had come to recognize spoke once more. "You are not alone. Stand firm in your faith and the truth will prevail." Tears streamed down my face as the words washed over me. The reassurance was like a balm to my weary soul, a reminder that even in the face of opposition, I was not abandoned. I left the church that night with renewed determination, resolved to continue the mission no matter the cost. As the weeks went on, the threats became more overt. My phone rang late at night, the voice on the other end speaking in cryptic warnings before hanging up. Flyers defaming me appeared around town, accusing me of spreading lies and inciting fear. But amidst the chaos, something incredible began to happen. More and more people reached out, drawn not by fear but by hope. Groups formed across the country, inspired by the message in my book. They shared their own stories of faith, organizing prayer circles and outreach efforts to strengthen their communities. The movement was no longer just mine. It belonged to everyone who believed in the truth I had seen. One night, as Sophia and I sat together in the quiet of our home, she looked at me with a mixture of pride and concern. "You've changed the world, Marcos," she said softly. "But promise me you won't lose yourself in the process." I took her hand, holding it tightly. "I won't," I promised, "because I'm not doing this alone. I never was." As the movement expanded, the world around me seemed to shift. The air felt charged with an unspoken tension, as if the spiritual battle I had witnessed in my vision was beginning to bleed into the physical realm. Reports of unrest reached us almost daily, protests, scandals, and acts of violence spreading like wildfire. It wasn't just in distant cities. Even our small town felt the ripple effects. People argued more openly, their patience thinner than before. Divisions grew sharper, cutting through families, friendships, and communities. In the church, however, a different energy prevailed. The pews were filled every week, not just with locals, but with people traveling from all over to hear the message firsthand. Some came seeking hope, others seeking answers. But what struck me most were the ones who came with stories eerily similar to mine, dreams of radiant figures, warnings of deception, and a growing sense that something monumental was approaching. One evening, after a particularly packed service, I found myself speaking with a young man who had driven several hours to be there. His name was Elijah, and there was a quiet intensity in his gaze as he recounted his own experience. "I didn't know who to tell," he admitted, his voice trembling. "I thought maybe I was going crazy. But then I read your book, and it was like you were describing exactly what I saw." "What did you see?" I asked gently. He hesitated, his hands twisting together. "It was a city, but not like any city I've ever been to. The buildings were perfect, too perfect, glowing with this golden light. There were people everywhere, but they all seemed off. They smiled, but their eyes were empty. And in the center of it all was this figure, shining so brightly I couldn't look directly at him. He spoke, and everyone listened like he was their god. But something about him felt wrong, like his light wasn't real. A chill ran down my spine. His description matched my vision almost exactly. "Elijah," I said, my voice steady, "you're not crazy. What you saw is real, and it's coming." His eyes widened, filling with a mix of fear and relief. "What do we do?" I didn't have an easy answer, but I gave him the same advice I gave everyone who asked. Stay rooted in faith, seek truth in the scriptures, and never forget that light alone isn't proof of righteousness. It was a message I repeated often, but each time it felt both urgent and inadequate. In the midst of this growing momentum, the threats against me escalated. Anonymous letters turned into vandalism, graffiti scrawled across the church walls, accusing me of spreading lies. One morning, I found the tires of my car slashed, a crude note tucked under the windshield wiper, "Stop now, or you'll regret it." Sophia begged me to involve the police, but I knew they wouldn't take it seriously. To them, I was just a local priest who had stirred up controversy with his visions, but I wasn't afraid. If anything, the opposition only solidified my resolve. Every attack felt like confirmation that I was on the right path. The deceiver didn't want the truth to spread, and that meant it was more important than ever to keep speaking. Then came the night everything changed. It was late, the town quiet under a heavy blanket of snow. I was in the church alone, preparing for the next day's service when the lights flickered. At first, I thought it was just a power issue, but then I felt it, a cold, suffocating presence filling the room. The warmth I had come to associate with divine guidance was gone, replaced by an oppressive weight that made it hard to breathe. I turned slowly, my heart pounding, and there he was. The figure from my vision stood at the back of the church, his radiant light casting unnatural shadows across the walls. His smile was serene, almost benevolent, but his eyes burned with an intensity that chilled me to the core. "Father Marcos," he said, his voice smooth and melodic, "you've been very busy." I couldn't speak. My throat felt dry, my body frozen in place. He took a step forward, his movements graceful and deliberate. "You've done well to spread your message," he continued, "but you're fighting a battle you can't win. Why exhaust yourself for a cause that's already lost?" Finally, I found my voice. "You're wrong," I said, my words trembling but firm. "Truth always wins in the end." His smile faltered just for a moment before returning with an unsettling calm. "Truth," he repeated as if tasting the word. "And what is truth, Marcos? Is it what you've seen, what you've been told? Or is it something far greater, something you can't even comprehend?" I clenched my fists, willing myself to stand tall. "The truth is what's written in the Word of God. It's not for you to twist or manipulate." His eyes narrowed, and the room seemed to grow colder. "You're a stubborn one," he said, almost amused. "But stubbornness won't save you. It won't save any of them." As he spoke, the light around him flickered, revealing brief glimpses of something dark and grotesque beneath the surface. It was as if his true form was struggling to break through, a chilling reminder of the deception he embodied. "You can fight me," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But know this, the seeds of doubt have already been sown, even among those closest to you." With that, he was gone, the light and cold vanishing as suddenly as they had appeared. I collapsed to my knees, gasping for air, my heart racing. His final words echoed in my mind, a haunting warning I couldn't ignore, even among those closest to you. Who had he meant? Sophia, my congregation, the growing network of believers across the country. The thought filled me with dread, but also with resolve. Whatever doubts he had sown, I would face them head on. The truth was worth any cost, even if it meant standing alone. The following days passed in a blur, each one feeling heavier than the last. The deceiver's words haunted me, casting doubt on everything I thought I knew. Even now, as I sat in the stillness of the church, I couldn't shake the chilling feeling that something was slipping through my grasp. I had shared my vision with so many, hoping to guide others along the path of truth, but the weight of it was beginning to wear on me. Everywhere I looked, I saw signs of the deception taking root. People I had trusted, people who had been by my side for years, began to question me. Their eyes no longer held the same unwavering faith they once had, and in their silence, I could hear the echoes of doubt creeping in. It was late one evening when I found myself sitting alone in the church, my thoughts a tangled mess. The silence felt deafening, and yet I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched. The cold, unnatural presence from that night in the church hadn't left me. It was as if someone, was waiting for me to falter. Then, just as I thought I couldn't take the wait any longer, Sophia appeared in the doorway. She didn't speak at first, just stood there, her gaze steady and full of quiet understanding. Slowly she walked toward me, her footsteps soft on the stone floor. When she reached me, she sat beside me, her hand resting gently on mine. For a long while neither of us spoke. The church, once a place of comfort and peace, now felt like an overwhelming force pressing in on me from all sides. Finally, Sophia broke the silence. "You're afraid," she said, her voice quiet but firm. I nodded, the truth of it weighing on me. "I am. I don't know what to do anymore. The people I've tried to help, the ones who believed in me, they're starting to doubt. I can see it in their eyes, Sophia. I can hear it in their voices. The deception is spreading faster than I can stop it." Her grip on my hand tightened slightly. "Then what are you going to do? Give up?" I looked at her, searching her face for the answer I desperately needed. "How can I fight it? How can I continue to spread the message when I don't even know who I can trust anymore?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down at our joined hands, then back at me, her eyes filled with something I hadn't seen before, strength, unwavering and certain. "You fight because you know the truth," she said, her voice unwavering. "You fight because you know what you saw and what you heard. And if the people around you can't see it, then you show them through your actions, through your words. You don't give up because it gets hard. You fight even when it feels impossible." I swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. She was right. In that moment, I realized the truth wasn't something I could hold on to alone. It was something that needed to be shared, even if it meant walking through the storm. The next morning, I stood in front of the congregation, my heart pounding. As I looked out at the sea of faces before me, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The doubts that had plagued me for days melted away, replaced by a quiet but unshakable resolve. I spoke with conviction, my voice steady as I shared the message, the one I knew deep down had to be heard. There was no more fear in me, no more hesitation. I spoke of the deception that was coming, of the challenges that lay ahead, but I also spoke of the hope we still had. I spoke of a truth that couldn't be erased, a light that would never fade. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then, slowly, one by one, the people in the congregation began to rise. Some had tears in their eyes, others stood in stunned silence, but they stood nonetheless. I saw faces I had known for years, faces that had once doubted me, now looking at me with a renewed sense of belief. And in that moment, I understood. The vision hadn't been about me. It had never been about me. It was about all of us. It was about a call to remember the truth in a world that was slipping further from it. But even as I stood there, feeling a small glimmer of victory, I knew the battle was far from over. The deceiver wasn't done. The seeds of doubt would continue to spread, testing the faith of those who walked with me. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had seen the truth. And no matter what happened, I would carry it with me to the end. I don't know how much longer I have. I don't know what the future holds, but I know this. The truth will find a way even in the darkest of times, and I will stand, unwavering, until the very end.